You ever get that feeling in your gut, like something's just not right? Like a chill you can't shake, even when the sun is out and everything looks normal. That's how this story starts. With a beautiful Saturday morning, clear skies, calm water, and the kind of peaceful silence you only get deep in the woods. A father and daughter, close as can be, head out on what should have been an ordinary fishing trip in the Pacific Northwest. You'd think it was just a wholesome weekend getaway, maybe even a bonding experience full of laughs, fresh air, and quiet memories. But by nightfall, everything unraveled into one of the most baffling, gut-wrenching disappearances in recent memory. And the strangest part? They vanished without a trace, until weeks later, when a hunter stumbled across a half-buried camera still intact and loaded with footage that's every bit as disturbing as it is confusing. And yeah, you're going to see exactly what was on it. Because in this video, we're not just telling a story, we're peeling back every layer of it, and by the end, you'll have the answer that brought you here. Now, let's be real for a second. I know there's a million videos out there promising wild mysteries and spooky footage, but I want you to stay with me here. Not just because the final few minutes will absolutely leave you speechless, but because this story hits on something deeper. It's not just about what happened in those woods. It's about fear, about trust, and about the invisible line between the known and the unknown. It's about the kind of real-life terror that doesn't scream at you. It whispers. And once it gets in your head, it stays there. This is one of those stories that doesn't just raise questions, it haunts you with them. So, if you're someone who thinks you've seen it all, or if you're just casually curious, buckle up. Because what you're about to hear is going to stick with you long after the video ends. I'm talking directly to you right now, not to an audience, not to the algorithm, but to you. Because the people in this story, they were just like us. Regular folks. A single dad doing his best. A 13-year-old girl who still thought fishing with her dad was more fun than texting her friends. These weren't thrill-seekers chasing ghosts or viral stunts. They were just out there, trying to enjoy a slice of nature before school started up again. And then, gone. No struggle, no witnesses, no blood trail. Just an abandoned truck, 2 fishing rods stuck in the sand, and a cooler with untouched sandwiches. For weeks, search teams combed the forest. Helicopters, dogs, thermal imaging. Nothing. Until a man out deer hunting stumbled across something half-hidden beneath the underbrush, a Nikon camera with a cracked screen and a dying battery. And once he watched what was on it, he knew something out there doesn't want to be found. But here's where things get really unsettling. This isn't some creepypasta. It's not a TikTok horror story with jump cuts and made-up monsters. The footage is real. The people are real. The mystery? Still very much alive. But the clues are there, you just have to know how to look. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the entire timeline, frame by frame. From the first photo they took by the river to the final seconds of video that chilled even veteran investigators to the bone. And I'll show you what they missed. I'll break down the audio, the symbols, the odd figures in the background, details that were dismissed as camera glitches or pareidolia. Except they weren't. And if you stick with me to the end, you'll see why. I need you to understand something before we go further. This story's not about shock value. It's about truth. It's about what happens when you wander a little too far from the path, when you let your guard down in a place that's seen more than it's shared. Because the deeper we go into this, the more we uncover things that were never meant to be found. And if you're the kind of person who can't look away from the uncomfortable, you're exactly where you need to be. There's a reason this story has been trending all over YouTube lately. Real missing persons footage, haunting forest discoveries, chilling true story. These aren't just tags, they're the breadcrumbs leading to something a whole lot bigger. And if you've ever felt drawn to unsolved mysteries or stories with no clean endings, you're going to want to see every second of what's coming next. Let's talk about John and Emily. He's a Navy veteran, recently divorced, trying to reconnect with his daughter after a few tough years. She's bright, adventurous, and just started 8th grade. Their fishing trip was meant to be a reset button. A quiet weekend just outside of Olympic National Park, away from texts, tests, and the tension of split custody. The camera they brought along? It wasn't high-tech. Just something to capture a few memories, Maybe a picture of Emily holding her first catch. Nothing fancy. But when the hunter found it and brought it to the authorities, they quickly realized this wasn't a normal missing persons case. Because in the last 2 clips, there's something watching them. At first, it's subtle, something behind the trees, a shadow, a shape that doesn't make sense. Then a noise. Not an animal. Not a person. Something else. And that's when the camera cuts out. From here on out, you'll hear theories, paranormal, criminal, even government conspiracy. But every theory has cracks. Every answer seems to raise more questions. And yet, there's one explanation that ties everything together. One that's buried in the footage, in the timestamps, in the final words caught on mic before the screen goes black. And yes, we're going to show you that too. Not just the footage, but the enhanced audio, the location logs, and the expert breakdowns that the public never saw until now. This isn't just about entertainment anymore. It's about finding closure for a family that never came home and for a story that refuses to stay buried. Now look, I know some of you are skeptics. Maybe you've seen too many top 10 haunted forests videos and think this is just more of the same. But if you give me the next few minutes, I promise you'll realize this one's different. Because the more you listen, the more you'll start to feel it too. That itch in your spine. That instinctive discomfort we all feel when we're near something we can't explain. That thing your brain tries to rationalize away, but your body knows is wrong. And that's the hook. That's what's going to keep you watching because deep down, part of you needs to know what was in that forest with them. And I'm going to show you. We're going to talk about the ranger station that didn't log their entry, the cryptic voicemail left on John's ex-wife's phone the night they disappeared, and the one blurry frame that experts believe contains a figure that doesn't match any known animal or person. We'll also dive into the interviews, the hunter who found the camera and what he says followed him back to his truck, the hikers who reported strange chanting sounds near the river trail, and the missing hiker from 3 years earlier whose campsite was found less than a mile away from John and Emily's last GPS ping. These aren't coincidences. These are puzzle pieces. And they all fit. But the most important part? You haven't even seen the most chilling moment yet. Because just when you think you've figured it out, when you think you know what happened, the final 12 seconds of footage will flip everything upside down. A scream, a sound no one can identify, and something that moves faster than anything human. And then static. That's where we'll end this section. But you're going to want to stay because what comes after that static is the twist no one saw coming. Are you ready to see what was on that camera? Just a few weeks before they vanished, John Carver had posted a photo on Facebook, him and Emily standing outside their favorite breakfast diner, each holding a stack of pancakes taller than their heads. The caption read, "Saturdays are for second chances." To his friends, it was a heartwarming update from a single dad finally finding his footing after a rough couple of years. But to those who knew John a little better, that post carried more weight than it let on. After serving 12 years in the Navy and returning home with more emotional scars than physical ones, John had struggled to adjust. His marriage unraveled in under 2 years, and he'd spent the better part of the last 12 months in court fighting for more time with Emily. Winning joint custody had felt like a lifeline for both of them. Their weekend fishing trip wasn't just a fun escape. It was something deeper. A reset. A small but important step toward rebuilding something the world had quietly fractured. John had chosen their destination carefully. He wasn't the kind of guy to just drive into the woods without a plan. That's why the location raised so many eyebrows. They weren't at a typical family-friendly campground or near any well-known lakes. Instead, they'd ventured almost 2 hours off the grid to a remote patch of forest skirting the Olympic National Park, near a stretch of river known locally as Dead Man's Bend. The name, of course, didn't appear on any official maps. It was the kind of moniker passed around in fishing forums and campfire stories, the kind that makes people smirk but still think twice. A place rumored to be peaceful, but eerily quiet. Too quiet. Even the locals avoided it. When investigators asked the bait shop owner nearby if he'd seen the father and daughter come through, he paused for a beat before answering, "Yeah, I saw him. Sweet girl. Polite." He asked about the trout run. Told them to stick closer to the lake. Don't think he listened though. And just like that, another breadcrumb. Why did John ignore the advice? Was it curiosity? Or something more? Emily, for her part, had seemed excited about the trip. Her text history showed nothing unusual, just the typical chatter with her best friend, links to a few funny TikToks, and a selfie from the truck as they drove through the forest captioned, "Dad says I can't have signal, but we'll see about that," grinning face with sweat. She even joked about it being creepy AF out there, but ended the message with a heart emoji. No signs of fear. No cryptic goodbyes. And yet, the last photo on her phone, never posted, was a blurry shot of something in the distance. It wasn't clear enough to identify. Maybe a tree. Maybe an animal. Maybe something else entirely. But the timestamp? Just 13 minutes before the last known moment the camera recorded. Investigators combed that photo, adjusted contrast, zoomed in 100 ways. Some saw nothing. Others saw what looked like a tall figure standing just beyond the tree line. Too thin to be a bear, too tall to be a person. But there were no other tracks nearby. No other campers. No signs of life. Now here's where things start getting murky. As more attention grew around the case, people online began digging through John's social media and message boards. And that's when something strange came up. 6 months before the trip, John had posted anonymously on a survivalist forum, asking about off-grid hot zones and locations where cell towers don't reach. He claimed he was researching for a writing project, something about a book or a screenplay, but the tone of the post felt off. Like he wasn't looking for inspiration, but instruction. Then came another post under the same alias. "Anyone ever hear of the Watchers near Deadman's Bend? Just heard a story that gave me chills." That was it. No replies, no follow-up. But the timestamp matched the period when John was planning their trip. So now the question becomes, did John know something? Was he chasing a legend? Testing a theory? Or was he drawn to something he didn't fully understand? Of course, not everyone thinks this is some grand mystery. Some say it was a tragic accident, plain and simple. That John probably slipped on wet rocks. Emily tried to help, and both were swept away. It's a theory that makes logical sense. Except the currents that day were calm. The weather, unusually warm and clear. And neither body ever surfaced. Not even a piece of clothing. Not a shoe. Not a hat. Not a single shred of personal belonging aside from the camera found nearly 2 miles inland. And that's the part no one can explain. Why would the camera be that far from the river? Who or what moved it there? Now, let's talk about the hunter who found it. His name was Mitchell Langford, a seasoned outdoorsman with over 20 years of experience tracking deer in that region. When he handed the camera over to authorities, he made a point to mention that he hadn't reviewed the footage in full. Said it made him feel wrong. Not scared. Just off. His hands were shaking as he passed it over, and later, in a recorded interview, he confessed to hearing something in the woods that day, something he described as a whisper, but not like a voice, more like the trees were breathing. At first, people chalked it up to nerves, or maybe guilt, but the more he talked, the more unsettled the details became. Mitchell claimed he felt watched, followed, even though no other tracks were found near the spot. He also said something else, something that was buried in the police report and only surfaced months later. He said the camera wasn't on the ground. It was wedged high up in a hollow tree trunk, as if someone or something placed it there. Naturally, online theories exploded. Some people think Mitchell knows more than he's saying, that maybe he found the pair and panicked. Others speculate that John staged the entire event, faked a disappearance, and vanished into the wilderness. But that doesn't track with what we know. His bank account hasn't been touched. No digital footprint. And Emily? No child her age could disappear like that without triggering an alert somewhere. Still, the red herrings keep piling up. A cryptic voicemail left on John's ex-wife's phone the night they went missing, just static, and what sounds like distant footsteps. A stranger seen on a trail cam 2 days before the disappearance, wearing a camouflage jacket and what looked like an old gas mask. When investigators followed up on the footage, the man was never identified. Locals swore no one like that had been in the area. But the image spread quickly online, labeled the gas mask figure, and theories about a forest cult or rogue survivalist group soon followed. Then there's the ranger, who went missing 3 years prior, also near Dead Man's Bend. Officially ruled an accident. Body never found. But a group of hikers discovered his abandoned gear, flashlight, boots, and journal, tucked into a hollowed-out stump just 200 yards from where John's camera was located. The journal was damp, but legible. Its last entry? Something is following me. It knows the forest better than I do. And that's where we leave it for now. Because the deeper you go into this story, the less it feels like a simple disappearance, and the more it starts to feel like something else entirely. Something ancient. Something watching. And the next clue we uncover might just be the one that changes everything. As the investigation into John and Emily's disappearance continued to gain traction, things started to take a bizarre turn. At first, the police were hopeful that the camera would lead them to a breakthrough. It was, after all, the only piece of physical evidence they had. But something strange happened when the footage was sent for analysis. The team reviewing the video reported that several crucial files had been corrupted, files that were, by all accounts, still intact when the camera was first found. The corrupted sections seemed random at first, but as they combed through it, they discovered a disturbing pattern. The files that were missing? They corresponded directly with the last moments of Emily's life, the last clear images before the camera cut out completely. The experts couldn't explain how or why that part of the footage would have vanished, but it was enough to raise alarms. How could an otherwise functional camera, one that had survived the elements and weeks buried in the woods, suddenly lose crucial footage? What had been deliberately erased? The authorities were quick to reassure the public that they were still pursuing all leads, but behind the scenes, there was a growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the footage. It was the entire situation. Things weren't adding up. Investigators began to notice subtle inconsistencies in the timeline, particularly surrounding the testimony of the hunter, Mitchell Langford. He'd been the one to find the camera, but something about his story didn't sit right. He swore up and down that he hadn't watched the footage before handing it over, but when asked to recount the exact moment he found it, his details were inconsistent. He couldn't remember where exactly the camera had been lodged in the tree, even though it was clearly an important detail. And when they pressed him on why he hadn't reported the find immediately, why he'd waited a full day to contact the authorities, his answers were vague, almost as if he was trying to avoid something. A few days after his interview, Mitchell vanished. His truck was found parked outside his home, but he was nowhere to be found. His cell phone had been turned off, and no one could reach him. The authorities were left to wonder if Mitchell had been running from something, or if he had simply been caught in a web he wasn't ready to untangle. But it wasn't just Mitchell who raised suspicions. A strange man, who had been lurking around the investigation on the edges, appeared in the footage, too. No one had really paid attention to him at first, assuming he was just another local trying to get in on the story, but something about his presence was odd. He was too invested, asking too many questions about the case, showing up at key moments, always just a little too close to the action. His name was David Harper, a self-proclaimed local historian who claimed to know a lot about the area where John and Emily had disappeared. He showed up at the police station one morning, offering help. At first, he seemed harmless enough, just another person curious about the strange disappearance. But as they spent more time with him, things started to feel off. David claimed to have extensive knowledge of the area's past, particularly its more unsettling history. He spoke cryptically about old Native American legends, about mysterious disappearances dating back centuries, and about dark forces lingering in the forest. He wasn't exactly speaking in any coherent factual way, but it was the way he said it, like he knew something no one else did, that made people uneasy. And it wasn't just his knowledge of obscure folklore. There was something personal in his eyes, something distant and calculating, as though he was too interested in John and Emily's story, as if it tied into something in his past he wasn't ready to confront. David offered to help with the search effort, and for a while, the authorities accepted his involvement. After all, any extra set of hands couldn't hurt, and David seemed to be genuinely invested in finding out what happened to the missing family. But there was always this nagging sense that he wasn't telling the whole truth. For one thing, the deeper they dug into his background, the murkier it got. It turned out that David had lived in the area for over a decade, but his past before that was entirely untraceable. No birth records, no social media presence, no family connections, nothing. His references were vague and always came from people who were either unreachable or evasive when asked about him. When the authorities finally ran his name through deeper databases, they found something unsettling. David Harper had been involved in a previous investigation, a missing persons case. A case that had gone cold, just like this one. The details were classified, but what the authorities could uncover was chilling. David had been a person of interest in that investigation, but the case was never solved, and David had disappeared from the public eye for several years after. Could it be that David knew something about John and Emily's fate that he wasn't ready to share? Or was he simply a man trying to bury his own dark past? As if that wasn't enough, another piece of the puzzle went missing just days after David Harper's sudden appearance in the case. A strange, anonymous email was sent to the police department, claiming to have information that would explain everything. But when they opened it, the attachment was corrupted, just like the footage. The email itself was bizarre, full of odd phrases that seemed like a riddle. The river never forgets. Neither do the trees. Look for what's buried in plain sight. No name, no return address. Just the unsettling feeling that someone knew more than they were letting on. The authorities tried to track the source of the email, but it was routed through a dozen proxy servers, making it nearly impossible to trace. It was as if someone was deliberately trying to keep the truth hidden.
But why?
Then came the strangest part of all. Late one night, a member of the search party, one of the local rangers who had been with the team from the beginning, came forward with a chilling confession. He had been out in the woods alone when he heard something that made his blood run cold. A whisper. Not like the kind of wind through the trees that you'd expect, but a distinct voice, low and almost urgent. It called out a name.
John.
The ranger, unsure of what to make of it, followed the sound deeper into the forest, only to find something that he would never forget. A small clearing, barely touched by human presence, with odd symbols etched into the trunks of trees and stones stacked in a strange pattern. What disturbed him even more was what he found in the center of the clearing, a small, weathered item, almost like a child's toy, half buried in the dirt. A necklace. A necklace that looked strikingly similar to one Emily had been wearing in her last selfie. When the rangers showed the object to the authorities, they were met with confusion and resistance. No one wanted to believe what they were looking at. It felt like too much. It felt like the past was clawing its way back to the surface, and they weren't ready to face it. But the truth? It was staring them right in the face. And now, as more of these strange events pile up, it becomes clearer than ever. Someone doesn't want this mystery solved. Someone is going to great lengths to keep the truth buried. But the question is, why? What is so dangerous about the story of John and Emily that people are willing to go to such extreme measures to keep it hidden? And what's more chilling is that the deeper they dig, the more it feels like the people trying to stop them from uncovering the truth are not just trying to protect themselves, they're trying to protect something much bigger. As the night falls over the forest, the only thing left to ask is, will the truth ever come out? Or is this mystery one that will remain buried forever? Just when it seemed the mystery surrounding John and Emily's disappearance couldn't get any more tangled, a new thread began to unravel, one that, at first, seemed completely unrelated, but would soon reveal itself as crucial to understanding the bigger picture. It all began when Karen, John's ex-wife, started receiving strange, threatening messages. She had always kept a low profile since the divorce, moving to a quiet neighborhood and trying to focus on her work as a freelance graphic designer. But as soon as the case hit the news, her phone began to buzz with unsettling frequency. At first, it was just anonymous text messages, cryptic phrases that didn't make sense. You're next. They know where you are. And then came the voicemail, a grainy recording, distorted beyond recognition, but still somehow clear enough to hear the words, "Stay out of it, Karen. This is bigger than you think." She tried to shrug it off, blaming it on the media frenzy that had surrounded the case. But when the next message arrived, an image of the family's old home, taken from a distance and timestamped just hours before, Karen's skepticism began to crack. It wasn't just a random threat, it was specific. Someone was watching her. Someone knew exactly where she lived, and they weren't afraid to remind her of that. She tried calling the police, but all they could offer was a generic reassessment of the case, telling her to take precaution and report any suspicious activity. But the truth was, Karen was already deep in the storm. She knew something was wrong, something far more dangerous than just a simple disappearance. Days passed, and Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into a situation she wasn't prepared for. She had been reluctant to involve herself in the case at first, trying to protect herself and Emily from any more chaos. But after that voicemail, after seeing that photograph of her house, she knew she couldn't stay on the sidelines. Her connection to John, however strained, gave her an insight into his state of mind during the days leading up to the trip. She knew he was desperate for a fresh start, trying to put the past behind him, but she also knew that John had always been secretive about certain things. She hadn't been married to him long enough to learn everything about his past, but she had learned enough to know that there were corners of his life he preferred to keep hidden. With no other recourse, Karen reached out to a private investigator, hoping that someone with experience in dealing with unsolved cases could shed light on the mystery. His name was Ethan Royce, a seasoned investigator who had worked on several cold cases involving disappearances, but with a reputation for pushing boundaries to get answers. At first, Karen was skeptical of his methods, but she was desperate for answers. Royce was a man with a methodical approach, every piece of evidence, every lead, examined under a microscope. But even he was starting to see how dangerous the situation had become. When he first reviewed the footage from the camera, he had the same reaction as everyone else: disbelief. The loss of crucial files, the distorted images, everything pointed to a cover-up. But who was orchestrating it? Ethan took a different angle, deciding to investigate the strange history of the area surrounding Dead Man's Bend. He knew there had to be something about that place, something tied to the land, to the people who lived there, and perhaps even something to do with John's recent obsession with it. Ethan started interviewing locals, but every single person he spoke to gave him the same unsettling response: "You don't want to know about that place." And when he pushed harder, the answers became even more cryptic. No one would speak openly about the dark history of the area. That's when Ethan's persistence paid off. A local woman, who had run a small antique shop near the park entrance, finally whispered something that made his blood run cold. People disappear there. They always have. If you go looking for them, you might just find what you're looking for. But don't say I told you. It wasn't much, but it was enough to convince Ethan that there was something far more sinister lurking in the shadows of Dead Man's Bend than anyone had let on. He dug deeper, pulling out historical records, old police reports, and even obscure town legends. That's when he stumbled upon something that would change the entire trajectory of the case: a series of missing persons reports, going back decades, all tied to the same region, all eerily similar in nature. The cases had never been linked together, but once Ethan laid them side by side, the patterns were undeniable: people who had ventured into the woods, never to return, with no explanation. The authorities had written these off as accidents, drownings, and wild animal attacks. But as Ethan stared at the reports, he saw a chilling consistency. Each person had gone missing in the vicinity of Dead Man's Bend, and each person's disappearance had been preceded by strange occurrences: whispers in the woods, sightings of shadowy figures, odd symbols carved into trees. The more he investigated, the more it seemed like there was something active in those woods, something that had been pulling people in for generations. And then came the real shock. The missing persons reports weren't just from strangers. One of the files he uncovered was a police report from nearly 20 years ago, detailing the mysterious disappearance of a local man named Ben Holloway. Holloway had been a close friend of John's father, a man who had been involved in the construction of several buildings near Dead Man's Bend. According to the report, Holloway had disappeared under strange circumstances, just like the others, leaving behind a trail of bizarre clues and cryptic messages. But the most damning detail? Holloway's last known contact had been with none other than John's father, who had been spotted near the area around the same time. Was it possible that John's own family had been tied to this dark history? Was there something buried in his past that even John didn't know about? As Ethan's investigation took on new life, the danger seemed to escalate. Karen's phone calls grew more frequent, strange men showing up outside her house, even following her around town. She wasn't sure if they were connected to the case, but the timing felt too coincidental. She began to feel trapped, as if the walls were closing in. And when Ethan showed her the police report about Ben Holloway, her face went pale. "I don't understand," she whispered, staring at the photo of Ben Holloway. "This man, he looks just like John's father." It was at this moment that Karen began to question everything. What if the truth was something far darker than she could have ever imagined? What if John's disappearance wasn't just a random accident, but part of something much bigger, a web of deceit, danger, and family secrets that no one was ready to confront? The more they uncovered, the more it seemed that the truth wasn't just buried in the woods, it was buried deep within John's own bloodline. And now it was too late to turn back. As Ethan pieced together the fragments of this ever-expanding mystery, Karen realized that the stakes had just been raised higher than she could ever have anticipated. Not only was the truth hidden, but someone, or something, was going to great lengths to make sure no one found it. The only question left was whether they would be able to uncover the truth before it was lost forever. But as the whispers in the woods grew louder, it became clear. No one was safe. And the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the game became. The tension was palpable now. Every passing day seemed to stretch longer, and Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. It wasn't just the anonymous messages anymore or the strange encounters with the men lurking around her neighborhood. It was the growing sense of paranoia that had begun to take hold of her every waking moment. The more she tried to get to the bottom of what had happened to John and Emily, the more it felt like the ground was slipping out from under her, like she was slowly sinking into a place where no one could reach her. And it wasn't just the uncertainty of the case that had her on edge. It was the mounting fear that she, too, was becoming part of a story she could never escape from. Ethan had been her rock throughout this madness. He was the one person she trusted, the one person who seemed to know how to handle the pressure. But even his calm, methodical demeanor couldn't hide the fact that things were spiraling out of control. He was the first to admit it. He'd been followed. A few days ago, he had noticed a black SUV tailing him on his drive home from one of the investigation meetings. It wasn't just a coincidence, it was deliberate. He'd turned a corner, and the vehicle had done the same. When he pulled into a gas station to check if he was being paranoid, the SUV had stopped a few cars down, its engine running for minutes before driving off without a word. It was clear now. Whoever was behind this didn't want them digging any deeper. But what was even more disturbing was the thought that the people who were watching them knew exactly where they were at all times. Then came the night Karen had been dreading. She'd been sitting at her kitchen table, sifting through a pile of documents and photos, evidence from the case that Ethan had dropped off earlier that day, when she heard something that made her blood run cold. A knock at the door. It was late, and her gut told her it wasn't someone she expected. With trembling hands, she opened the door, only to find no one there. At first, she thought it was just a prank, some twisted joke to mess with her. But then she saw it, a small, handwritten note on the ground, pressed into the dirt beneath her doorstep. It read, "You should have stayed away, Karen. It's too late now." Her heart sank as she bent down to pick it up. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but there was something unmistakably chilling about the message. She couldn't tell if it was a warning or a threat, but one thing was clear. Someone was watching her, and they weren't afraid to make their presence known. For a moment, she stood frozen, her mind racing with possibilities. Who could have left this? How long had they been there, waiting? And what did this message mean for her safety? Panic clawed at her chest, but she forced herself to steady her breath. This wasn't the time to fall apart. She needed to think. The more she considered the implications, the more she realized the magnitude of the danger she was in. Whoever had left this note wasn't just warning her. They were sending a message, a threat meant to stop her from uncovering the truth about John and Emily's disappearance.
But why?
What did they want her to stop digging for? The darkness outside seemed to press in around her, as though the walls were closing in on her little house. She wasn't alone. She could feel it. The air was thick with the unsettling sense that something or someone was lurking in the shadows just beyond her sight. Her thoughts raced, flashing back to the strange occurrences that had started with John's trip and had only escalated since. The messages, the strange figures, the corrupt footage, all of it pointed to one undeniable truth. The deeper she got into this mystery, the more dangerous it became. And now it seemed like the danger had finally caught up with her. Just as she was about to call Ethan to share the note, she heard it again, a sound from outside, faint at first, but growing louder. A rustling in the bushes, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Someone was moving around her property. Fear surged through her, and for a moment, she froze, her heart hammering in her chest. Should she call the police? Should she try to run? But the logical part of her mind knew that running wouldn't solve anything. She wasn't sure where to go, and wherever she went, whoever was after her would always be one step ahead. It was clear that the game had changed. This wasn't just about finding answers anymore, it was about survival. Ethan had told her to be careful. He had warned her that the further they pushed into this investigation, the more they would stir the hornet's nest. But she had never imagined it would come to this. She never thought that her own life would be at risk, that she'd be dragged into a nightmare so deep that even the shadows seemed to have a mind of their own. The thought that someone had been silently watching her for days, waiting for her to make a wrong move, gnawed at her. The feeling of being hunted, of not knowing who to trust or where to turn, was a suffocating weight on her shoulders. And just when Karen thought she might be able to regain control of the situation, something else happened that would push her into a spiral of fear and uncertainty that she wasn't prepared for. A call came in. It was from Ethan. His voice was shaky, unlike anything she'd ever heard before. He told her he needed to meet her immediately. Something had happened. Something was wrong. "Karen, I think I've made a mistake. I shouldn't have pushed so hard," he said, his words coming out in frantic bursts. "They're watching me. I don't know who they are, but they're watching me, and I don't think I'm going to make it out of this alive." The phone call cut out abruptly, and all that was left was the deafening silence of the line. Karen's heart stopped. She called him back, her hands trembling, but there was no answer. The line was dead. He was gone.
Just like that.
It was the moment she truly understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a case of missing people, it was something far darker, something far more sinister. Someone didn't want the truth to come out, and they were willing to do anything to stop it. Ethan had been the last person she trusted in this spiraling mess, and now he, too, had vanished. Her mind raced as she considered the implications. Had they gotten to him? Had he been silenced before he could expose whatever dark secret lay at the heart of John and Emily's disappearance? The thought of losing the one person who had been helping her made her feel utterly alone, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. But even in her panic, a single thought cut through the chaos. The truth is still out there. And she had to find it no matter what the cost. Just as Karen thought the walls around her were closing in, when every shadow seemed to hold a threat, and every whisper in the wind felt like a warning, an unexpected revelation shattered everything she had believed about the case. It all began with a single phone call, one she had avoided for days, but in the madness of her growing paranoia, she finally answered. It was a number she didn't recognize, and the voice on the other end was familiar, but chillingly different. It was Ethan. His voice, once steady and reliable, now trembled with an urgency she hadn't heard before. "Karen," he said, his breath ragged as if he had been running. "You need to listen carefully. I've made a huge mistake. I've been looking at this all wrong." The words hit Karen like a cold gust of wind, making her stomach tighten in fear. The messages, the threats, the footage, it's all connected, but not in the way we thought. We're not just dealing with random disappearances or some dark force in the woods. It's much worse than that. For a moment, Karen didn't know how to respond. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of what he was saying. "Ethan, what are you talking about? What's going on?" Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, as if he feared being overheard. I've been doing some digging into John's past, into his family. You need to understand something. John didn't just go to Dead Man's Bend for a fishing trip. He was going there for something specific. A reason I didn't see at first. But now, after looking deeper into it, I know what he was really after. The camera, the footage, it wasn't meant to be found. The words hung in the air, and Karen felt an icy chill crawl up her spine. What do you mean? What was he looking for? Ethan paused, and when he spoke again, his voice sounded strained, as if he were on the brink of saying something that could change everything. It's all tied to John's father. You remember Ben Holloway? The one from the old police report? Turns out, he wasn't just a friend of John's father. He was more involved in the disappearance of John's mother than we realized. And John knew about it. He knew the truth, and he was going to expose it. That's why he went to Dead Man's Bend. A cold wave of realization washed over Karen. Everything she had been investigating, every lead she had followed, suddenly felt like a distorted piece of the puzzle, a puzzle that had been deliberately warped to hide the truth. Ethan's words started to resonate in her mind, and for the first time, the pieces seemed to shift into place, revealing something far more sinister than she had ever imagined. John's disappearance, Emily's sudden absence, the threats they had both faced. It wasn't just about uncovering hidden secrets, it was about exposing a dangerous, buried past that some people were willing to kill to keep hidden. Karen's pulse quickened as she processed what Ethan had said. You're telling me John was murdered because of something his father did? Her voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of the accusation suffocating her. But even as the words left her mouth, another unsettling thought gnawed at her. Why didn't he tell me this? Why didn't he trust me with it? Ethan's voice faltered. Because he didn't trust anyone, Karen. Not after what he found. And you're not going to like this, but I need you to hear it. The camera footage, it wasn't just a coincidence. John planted it. He knew he was being followed, knew that someone would come looking for the camera. But he couldn't risk anyone getting to the truth before he did. The footage was meant to be a warning, a message to anyone who got too close. Karen's thoughts were spinning. The idea that John, the man she had thought she knew so well, had been playing a game of cat and mouse with her, hiding things from her, manipulating the investigation, was a bitter pill to swallow. She had trusted him with her deepest fears, her darkest thoughts, and yet, he had been hiding a truth so dark it had driven him to risk everything, including his life. The man she had been looking for, the one who had been swallowed up by the mystery of Dead Man's Bend, wasn't the victim she had believed him to be. He was part of the danger. Before she could respond, Ethan's voice trembled again. Karen, I've been trying to piece this together for days, but something's wrong. I've been followed. Not by the people who've been stalking us before. This time it's different. They're everywhere, watching my every move. I don't know how much time I have left. The connection started to cut out, the static growing louder in her ear, until the line went completely dead. Karen sat there, frozen, her mind reeling from the sudden flood of information. Everything had changed in that moment. The man she thought was her ally, Ethan, was now caught in a web of lies, one that went back further than she could have ever imagined. And John had known more than she had ever realized. She stared at the phone, unable to process the weight of what had just happened. Her hands were shaking, but her mind refused to quiet. The picture had been clearer than ever before. John wasn't just a victim. He was a pawn in a game that had been set in motion long before he stepped foot in Dead Man's Bend. And the more she thought about it, the more Karen realized there was one thing she had overlooked, the one detail that could change everything. When Karen had first watched the footage, she had seen a shadow in the background, a figure standing just at the edge of the frame. At first, she had assumed it was just a trick of the camera, an illusion. But now, she realized that the figure wasn't an accident. Whoever it was had been standing there deliberately, watching, waiting. That figure, whoever it was, wasn't a random bystander. They were involved in everything. And whoever they were, they had been playing Karen all along. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Karen realized just how far she had fallen into a trap. She had trusted people who had been lying to her from the start. Ethan, John, even the people who had been sending her threats. All of them were part of a far bigger conspiracy. The question wasn't who was responsible for the disappearances. It was who was left to trust, and who was pulling the strings behind it all. Karen's breath caught in her throat as she realized the truth. She was already a part of something she could never escape from. And now there was no turning back. As Karen sat there, her mind racing with the twisted truths she had just uncovered, she felt a weight pressing down on her chest that was unlike anything she had experienced before. The revelation that Ethan had been hiding something, that John had known more than he let on, it all created a storm inside her, a storm that had nowhere to go. She wasn't sure who she could trust anymore, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized that the people she had leaned on for support had either been part of the conspiracy or had been unknowingly dragged into it. It wasn't just about solving the mystery anymore, it was about survival. And that was a battle she wasn't sure she could win. The phone call with Ethan, the abrupt disconnection, had shaken her more than she'd let on. She had tried to call him back immediately, her fingers trembling as she dialed, but the line was dead. There was no sign of him, no trace. And as the hours passed, it became clear to her that Ethan's warning hadn't just been a cry for help. It had been his way of saying goodbye. He knew something she didn't, something that had pushed him to a breaking point. And now he was gone. Just like everyone else who had dared to uncover the truth about Dead Man's Bend. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the haunting thought that kept circling in her mind, the feeling that someone close to her had been involved in all of this from the start. The idea that they had manipulated her, used her, and played on her trust to get what they wanted. And as much as she hated the thought, Karen couldn't shake the suspicion that it was someone she had never suspected, someone who had been right beside her through the darkest days of this investigation. It was her brother, Ben. Ben had always been there for her. He had been the one who helped her when she first started investigating, the one who kept her grounded when the pressure mounted. But now, as the truth began to unfold, Karen realized that Ben's behavior had been increasingly erratic. There had been moments when he seemed to know more than he let on, when he showed an unnerving level of interest in the investigation. He had pushed her to look deeper into certain aspects of the case, guiding her towards certain clues that, at the time, seemed innocuous. But now, with everything she had learned, Karen couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion that he had been playing her the whole time. The thought that someone she loved could be involved in this madness made her stomach turn. And so, the decision had to be made. She had to confront him. She couldn't keep running from the truth, no matter how painful it was. But there was one problem. Karen didn't know if she could handle what she might find. If Ben was involved, it meant that he wasn't the person she thought he was. It meant he had lied to her, manipulated her, and worst of all, it meant he might be directly tied to the danger that had been stalking her every move. The weight of that possibility hung heavily over her as she sat in her car, parked just outside Ben's house, watching the faint glow of lights through the window. Her mind swirled with questions. How deep did this go? How far was Ben willing to go to protect whatever secret he was hiding? And if he was involved, what did that mean for her own safety? Was she walking into a trap? With a deep breath, Karen stepped out of the car and approached the front door, her hands shaking as she raised her fist to knock. But before she could even make contact with the door, it swung open. Ben stood there, his face unreadable, his eyes narrowed with suspicion as he looked at her. His usual warmth, the easygoing demeanor she had always relied on, was gone. Instead, there was something colder in his eyes, something distant. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The tension between them was palpable, a suffocating silence that seemed to stretch on forever. "What's going on, Karen?" Ben's voice was low, cautious. He already knew something was wrong. But how much did he really know? Karen took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest as she fought to keep her voice steady. "I need answers, Ben," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "I need to know what's going on. I need to know if you're involved in this." Ben's expression shifted, and for a brief moment, Karen thought she saw a flicker of guilt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the calm, guarded mask he had perfected over the years. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice just a touch too calm to be believable. "You're being paranoid." This is just some crazy conspiracy. Don't lie to me, Karen snapped, her anger flaring. I know you've been involved in this from the beginning. You've been pushing me to investigate, pushing me to dig deeper. You've been steering me towards certain things, and now Ethan's gone, he's missing, and I'm left here, alone, trying to make sense of this mess. And you want me to believe this is all some coincidence. Ben's eyes darkened, and for a split second, Karen thought he might snap. But instead, he took a deep breath and stepped aside, allowing her to enter.
Fine.
If you want to know the truth, I'll tell you, he said quietly. But you might not like it. Inside, the air felt thick, heavy with secrets. Karen followed Ben into the living room, her mind racing as she tried to prepare for whatever revelation he was about to give her. But as he started to speak, Karen realized something. He wasn't just going to tell her the truth. He was giving her an ultimatum. I've been a part of this investigation because I had no choice, Ben said, his voice low and strained. But now, it's come to a point where I can't protect you anymore. You've uncovered too much. If you keep going, there's no going back. The people behind this will make sure of that. Karen's heart skipped a beat as the gravity of his words sank in. What do you mean, protect me? Who are you really protecting? Who's behind this? Ben hesitated, then slowly looked her in the eye. I'm trying to protect you from the truth. The truth about what happened to our father, Karen, and everything that followed. The words hung in the air like a punch to the gut. Their father? The man who had disappeared years ago? The one whose disappearance had always been shrouded in mystery? Karen had never expected to hear his name again, and certainly not in this context. But as she stared at Ben, the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a way that terrified her. You don't have to go any further, Ben continued, his voice barely above a whisper. I can make this stop. I can protect you, Karen. All you have to do is leave this behind. Let the mystery die. And with that, Karen was faced with a choice that seemed impossible. Walk away and leave the truth buried forever, or keep going, risking everything, her safety, her family, and even her life, in order to uncover a past she might not be able to survive. The weight of the decision was unbearable, and as she stood there, trying to find her voice, she realized just how far she had already gone. There was no turning back now. The weight of Ben's words hung in the air, suffocating Karen, her chest tightening as if the room itself were closing in around her. You don't have to go any further, he had said. But she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play here, more than just the tragic past of their father, more than even the twisted secrets of Dead Man's Bend. This was bigger, far bigger, and it wasn't just her or Ben caught in the crossfire. It was everyone, and she was being dragged deeper into a web of lies that extended far beyond the people she had trusted. Ben had been right about one thing, there was no walking away now. But the more Karen thought about it, the more she realized that her choice wasn't simply whether to walk away or keep going. It was about surviving the storm that was already crashing down on her, whether she was prepared for it or not. Because she had stumbled onto something so dark, so vast, that she couldn't undo the damage. The conspiracy she was fighting against wasn't just about John or his family, it was a network of powerful people, people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. And they weren't going to let Karen, or anyone else, get in their way. Ben's voice cut through her racing thoughts. Karen, I've been trying to keep you safe. But this isn't something you can fight alone. The more you uncover, the more dangerous it becomes. They're watching us. All of us. He seemed to falter for a second, his eyes flickering with something between fear and regret. You don't understand. I never wanted this for you. But I've made my choices. And now, so have you. Before Karen could respond, the shrill sound of her phone ringing shattered the tense silence. It was an unknown number. Without thinking, she picked up. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakable, cold, calculated, threatening. You should have listened, Karen. Now it's too late. The voice paused, and she could hear the faint sound of shuffling papers on the other end. You've been digging in places you shouldn't. You've uncovered something that goes far beyond your father's disappearance. This is bigger than you can imagine. We've been watching you. We know what you found, And we know who you've talked to. If you think you're the only one caught in this mess, think again. People have died to keep this quiet. And you will too if you don't stop now. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. The fear she had been holding back all this time, the anxiety that had been creeping into her thoughts, suddenly broke free, flooding her with an overwhelming sense of danger. She couldn't deny it anymore. This was a fight for her life. And the deeper she dug, the more lives she was risking. It wasn't just her own survival at stake, it was everyone she cared about. "What do you want from me?" she managed to force out, her voice shaking, barely audible over the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. The voice on the other end didn't answer immediately. There was a deliberate pause, as if the person on the other end was savoring the moment, knowing how much they were rattling her. "We want you to stop, Karen. We want you to leave the past buried where it belongs. If you don't, the consequences won't just affect you. Your family, your friends, they'll pay for your choices." The line went dead, and Karen stood frozen, her mind spinning as she tried to process the threat. She knew it wasn't an idle warning. She had already seen too much, uncovered too much to believe it was a bluff. They weren't just trying to silence her. They were trying to erase everything she had uncovered. And if she didn't act fast, she could very well be the next name on their list. But just as the tension started to rise to its breaking point, something unexpected happened. The door to the living room slammed open, and Karen's heart leaped into her throat. It was Ben, only he wasn't alone. Behind him stood two men, unfamiliar, their expressions hard and cold. One was tall, with dark, piercing eyes, while the other was shorter, stocky, with a scar running across his cheek. They weren't here to help. "Ben, what the hell is going on?" Karen demanded, her voice trembling as she backed away from the two strangers. "Who are they?" Ben didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing that he had been caught in the same web she had, tangled in the lies and deceit he had tried to protect her from. The betrayal in his eyes was unmistakable. "Karen, I never wanted you to be involved in this," Ben said, his voice thick with guilt. "But you've dug too deep. They're not going to stop now. I can't protect you anymore. I've been trying to keep you safe, but it's too late." Karen felt her pulse quicken as the full scale of the situation hit her. This wasn't just about Deadman's Bend or John, or even Ben's involvement. It was about something far larger, something she couldn't even fully comprehend yet. The conspiracy went beyond anything she had imagined. Ben's allegiance, his actions, all of it had been part of a much darker plan. And now, as the two men closed in on her, Karen realized that she wasn't just caught in the crossfire, she was at the center of the storm. The man with the scar stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "You've been asking too many questions, Karen. We don't like that. People like you don't get to dig into things they don't understand. You're going to stop, or you'll regret it." Ben's face was pale, his body rigid with the knowledge that there was no way out of this. "I tried to warn you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But it's not just me they're after.
It's you."
They'll come for everyone you know if you don't stop. This isn't just about us anymore. It's about the people pulling the strings." The walls seemed to close in on Karen as the weight of everything she had uncovered pressed down on her shoulders. The truth was worse than she could have ever imagined. She wasn't just a victim in this conspiracy, she was the key to everything. And if she didn't act fast, she would be the one who paid the ultimate price for seeking the truth. With every passing second, the danger escalated. She could feel the walls closing in, the noose tightening around her neck. And as the two men took a step closer, Karen knew she had one final choice to make: fight back, or let the conspiracy swallow her whole. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with tension as Karen stood frozen in the face of the men who had just cornered her. They were closing in, their footsteps slow and deliberate, each one echoing off the walls, amplifying the fear that was gnawing at her insides. Ben's face, pale and full of regret, seemed like a ghost of the brother she once knew. But the truth was undeniable now. He had never been the protector she thought he was. In that moment, it wasn't just her safety that was at risk. It was her very future, and perhaps the lives of everyone she loved. The game had changed, and Karen had been thrust into the heart of it all, with no way out. "What are you going to do, Karen?" The man with the scar sneered, taking another step toward her. His eyes were cold, calculating, as if he were savoring every moment of her growing fear. "You've come too far. Now it's time to pay the price." Her mind was racing, her heart hammering in her chest, but she couldn't let herself break.
Not now.
Not when she was so close. She had come too far, uncovered too much, to back down. The final piece of the puzzle had always been just out of reach, lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to uncover it. But what was it? What had she missed? And why were these people willing to go so far to keep it hidden? As if answering her unspoken question, Ben stepped forward, his voice barely audible but laced with a strange, bitter finality. "You think you know everything, Karen. But you don't. You've only scratched the surface of what's really happening. Dead Man's Bend was never just about the past.
It was about control.
About power. About using the secrets of this town to manipulate everything and everyone around it." Karen's breath caught in her throat as the realization hit her like a wave. This wasn't just about the disappearance of her father or the fishing trip that had gone horribly wrong. This was about something much bigger. Something that stretched far beyond her family, far beyond the town of Dead Man's Bend. This was a network of power brokers, manipulators, and corrupt figures who had been controlling everything from the shadows, using the tragedy of her father's disappearance, the deaths, and the cover-ups to maintain their grip on the town, on people's lives, and she was the key, the final piece of the puzzle they needed to seal their control. "You've been playing into their hands, Ben," Karen said, her voice thick with disbelief and anger. "You were part of this all along." Ben's eyes flickered, but he didn't deny it. "I didn't have a choice. None of us did. The people behind this, they don't just pull strings, Karen. They make you think you're in control, but you're not. And now, you're in too deep. I couldn't let you get pulled under, but I couldn't stop you either." The weight of his betrayal was almost too much to bear. She had trusted him, believed in him, and now she realized he had been just another pawn in the game. But this was bigger than Ben. She couldn't let him or anyone else stop her from finishing what she had started. She couldn't let them win. "I'll stop when I'm ready," Karen said, her voice firm, though every part of her wanted to collapse from the pressure. "And you can't make me go back." Without another word, she turned, taking in the room around her. Her mind raced, looking for anything, any clue, any hint that would give her the edge she needed. And that's when she saw it, a small, seemingly innocuous device sitting on the corner of the table, a camera. The same camera that had once belonged to her father. The same camera that had disappeared all those years ago, never to be seen again. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized what she was holding. It was the final piece. The missing link. Her father's camera had been part of the whole conspiracy. It wasn't just lost, it had been taken, hidden away, because it contained the one thing that could unravel everything, the evidence that could destroy everything the people behind this had built. The scarred man noticed her gaze and moved forward quickly, but it was too late. Karen grabbed the camera, her fingers trembling, and hit the play button. The screen flickered to life, and the haunting images of her father appeared, standing at the edge of Dead Man's Bend, his face filled with fear as he recorded something in the distance. The footage was shaky, distorted, but as it focused in, Karen could make out the figure of a man standing just beyond the trees. A man she didn't recognize. And then, her father's voice, whispering urgently into the camera. "They're coming for us. They already know what we've found. Don't trust anyone, not even Ben." The words struck Karen like a blow to the chest. Her father had known. He had known the whole time what they were hiding, and that's why they had taken him. And it wasn't just about Dead Man's Bend. It was about a vast, insidious network that had been controlling everything, stealthily manipulating people, destroying lives, and hiding in plain sight. And now, they were coming for her. Before she could process it further, the room exploded with movement. The scarred man lunged forward, grabbing at her arm, but Karen was faster. She twisted away, knocking over the table in the process. She wasn't sure where the strength was coming from, But all the fear, all the pain, all the anger she had been holding onto erupted in a single, desperate act. She hit the button on the camera one more time, and a hidden file began to play. Footage from a hidden camera inside the town hall, showing a meeting between some of the most powerful people in Dead Man's Bend. Among them was Ben, his face cold and calculating as he shook hands with someone Karen had never seen before. But what caught her breath in her throat was the figure sitting at the head of the table, the one who had orchestrated it all, the one who had been pulling the strings behind everything. Her heart dropped as she recognized the man, Ethan. Ethan, the one she thought had been trying to help her, the one who had gone missing and whose warnings had sent her down this path. He hadn't been a victim of the conspiracy. He had been a part of it. The realization hit her like a freight train. Ethan had been working against her all along. And now, as the footage continued to play, the man with the scar stepped forward, his voice full of venom. "You've just uncovered the last of the evidence we needed to clean up your mess. You've played your part, Karen. But this is where your story ends." But Karen wasn't done. She had the truth now. She had the evidence. And for the first time in this nightmare, she felt the power shift. She wasn't just the victim anymore. She was the one in control. And with one last, defiant glance at Ben and the two men, Karen knew she was going to expose them all. They could try to silence her, but the truth was already out. The world would know what happened. The world would know who they really were. The game wasn't over yet. The dust had barely settled when Karen finally stood in the small, dimly lit room, watching the screen flicker in front of her. The final images of the meeting, the footage that had exposed everything, were now saved, secure, and ready to be shared. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure if she was ready to take that final step. It was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment she had fought for, but the weight of it all still pressed down on her. The conspiracy was unraveling, the people responsible would be held accountable, and Dead Man's Bend would finally face the truth of what had been done in the shadows. Yet, as she sat there, staring at the glowing screen, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. There had been no grand victory, no cheers of triumph. Instead, there was a heavy silence, as if the world had gone quiet in response to the storm she had just weathered. The names of the powerful figures involved in the conspiracy were now public. The town officials, business tycoons, and influential figures who had been pulling the strings for decades would now face the consequences. People had already begun to question everything: the disappearances, the strange deaths, the unsolved mysteries that had haunted the town for years. But even as the authorities moved in and the truth came to light, Karen couldn't help but think about the cost. Her father was still gone, his voice still echoing in that haunting footage. Ben was in custody, but his betrayal left a scar deeper than any wound. And Ethan, the man she had trusted, the one who had convinced her that he was on her side, was now a ghost, his true intentions clear only when it was too late. Karen had fought for the truth, and she had gotten it. But at what cost? Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from her mother. "I'm proud of you, Karen. But I need you to know, we're not done. There's still so much we don't understand." Her mother's words, though comforting, only deepened the confusion. Yes, the people responsible would be tried, and the conspiracy was over, but there were still questions that lingered in the air. Why had her father gotten involved in the first place? What had he uncovered that made him a target? And what about Ethan's role in all of it? The video footage had revealed enough to tear down the walls of the conspiracy, but it hadn't explained the full story. There were still layers that hadn't been peeled back, and now, the answers seemed even more elusive than ever. A deep breath escaped Karen's lips as she stood up, walking over to the window. The town of Dead Man's Bend stretched out before her, the peaceful facade of the place now permanently shattered. What had once been a small, quiet town in the middle of nowhere had been exposed as a hub of corruption, power, and manipulation. The people who had lived here for generations had no idea what had been hidden beneath the surface. But now they would. Now everyone would know. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the town, Karen realized something that had been gnawing at her for weeks. The conspiracy wasn't just about the people involved, or even the power they had. It was about control, and how far people were willing to go to maintain it. They hadn't just manipulated the town, they had manipulated everyone. And the more she thought about it, the more Karen realized how deeply embedded this corruption ran, not just in Dead Man's Bend, but in every corner of the world. The fight against it wasn't over. It was just beginning. Karen looked down at the camera in her hands, the one her father had used to record the final, haunting moments of his life. She knew that it was over for now. The truth had been exposed, and the world would see it. But there was still so much more to uncover, so many more pieces to the puzzle. She wasn't done. She couldn't be. Not yet. With a determined sigh, she set the camera down, her fingers brushing against the keys once more. This was her story, but it was also the story of everyone who had ever been silenced, everyone who had been forced to live in the shadows, and everyone who had been used as a pawn in a game they didn't even know they were playing. And now it was her turn to fight, not just for her father or for herself, but for the truth. Because the truth was the one thing that couldn't be silenced, no matter how hard they tried. Just as she hit send on the final message, her phone buzzed again. It was from an anonymous number. "You've made a powerful enemy, Karen. This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Her blood ran cold as she stared at the screen. The message was simple, but it was enough to make her realize that the battle was far from over. And as the last of the sunlight faded behind the mountains, Karen knew that she had only just begun to scratch the surface of the darkness that still lingered over Dead Man's Bend. She wasn't done. Not yet.